A white woman gave birth to twins, one white, one black. What her husband found out shocked everyone. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. Your opinion is important to us. The town was small, a place where everyone knew each other's names and histories. It was the kind of place where routines shaped lives and whispers traveled faster than the wind. Neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, and the familiar creak of the old grocery store door painted a picture of suburban simplicity. But beneath the friendly waves and polite smiles, the town carried a quiet weight, a reluctance to embrace what it did not understand. In this town lived Emily and Michael, a couple whose love had always seemed unshakable. Emily was the heart of her community, a teacher whose passion for helping children brought warmth to every classroom. Her laughter filled their small home, and her gentle hands nurtured everything she touched, from the blooming flowers in her garden to the hopes and dreams of her students. She adored poetry and often left small notes with verses around the house for Michael to find, a habit he cherished more than he ever admitted. Michael was her opposite in many ways, but they fit together perfectly. Where Emily was soft-spoken and patient, Michael was steady and grounded. He worked with his hands, running a small auto repair shop passed down from his father. His life was one of grease, wrenches, and the satisfaction of solving problems piece by piece. The townspeople respected his honesty and skill, though few truly knew the man beneath the worn-out coveralls. The day Emily told Michael they were expecting twins, his heart nearly burst with joy. They spent months preparing, choosing names, painting the nursery, and dreaming of the life they would share with their children. Emily would often press his hand against her belly, delighting in the kicks and tiny movements. "Jacob and Joshua," she whispered one night, her voice soft in the dark. "That's what we'll call them." Michael agreed without hesitation. They felt perfect. Two names, side by side, inseparable, just like their family would be. When the day of the delivery came, it was earlier than expected. The sky outside the hospital window was a soft gray, the air thick with the promise of rain. The halls bustled with nurses and doctors, but inside the delivery room, time seemed to slow. Emily's face was pale, her body strained, but her eyes, those bright, beautiful eyes, held determination and love. Michael was by her side, his rough hand clutching hers, whispering words of encouragement, though his voice trembled with fear. The first cry came suddenly and powerfully. A nurse lifted a tiny, pink-faced baby into the air. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. Michael's heart swelled as he saw their first child, Jacob, his skin soft and fair, a perfect reflection of Emily. But there was no time to celebrate. The room remained tense as the second child arrived, and with his cry, a subtle shift occurred. The nurses exchanged quick glances. The doctor's expression flickered with something Michael couldn't name. In the swaddled bundle lay Joshua, his skin a deep, rich brown, his eyes wide and curious. His tiny fists clenched the fabric tightly, as if already holding on to something unseen. A beat of silence. It was the kind of pause that carries the weight of 1,000 thoughts unspoken. Then the bustle resumed, the beeping of machines, the hurried movements of nurses. Michael barely had time to process the sight of his sons before a new terror gripped him. Emily's hand, which had been clutching his so tightly, began to loosen. Her breath, which had fought so hard for each gasp, grew shallow and broken. "Emily!" His voice cracked as he turned to her, but her eyes fluttered open one last time, searching for him. She tried to speak, and he leaned in close. "Take care of them, Michael. Promise me." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of her heart. And then, stillness. The monitors screamed their cold, mechanical chorus, and Michael felt the world collapse around him. His hand was still in hers, but she was gone. In the chaos that followed, Michael's grief was a raw, open wound, but even through his shattered heart, he felt the tension in the room. The glances from the nurses, the hesitation when they placed his sons in his arms. One child, pale as milk, and the other dark as night. Questions already clawed at him, but the devastation of Emily's loss was too vast to allow room for anything else. He clung to the two tiny lives she had given him, her final gifts, his only tether to a world that had just been torn apart. The news spread through the town faster than he could breathe. People who had once greeted him with warmth now met him with narrowed eyes and tight-lipped whispers. The narrative twisted quickly and cruelly. A scandal, a betrayal, a story that satisfied the town's hunger for gossip. "She must have cheated," someone whispered at the diner. "There's no other explanation," echoed another voice at the grocery store. It was not just curiosity. It was condemnation. The change was swift and cutting. At his repair shop, customers stopped coming, their loyalty crumbling under the weight of suspicion. On the sidewalk, neighbors crossed the street to avoid him. He felt their eyes on his back, their judgments like invisible knives. But the worst cuts came from his own family. His father, George, a man of stern principles and cold certainties, visited him 3 days after the funeral. His voice was a low rumble, heavy with disapproval. "Michael," he said without preamble, "you need to face reality. Something's not right. You should get a test done. Find out the truth." Michael's chest burned with anger, but it was tangled with something worse. Doubt. He wanted to scream that he didn't need a test, that he knew Emily, knew her heart, knew the depths of her love. But the seed had been planted, and it twisted painfully inside him. His sister, Christina, gentler but no less firm, tried to reason with him. "You're grieving," she said softly, "but wouldn't it help to be sure? Just to silence the talk." The talk. That was what this was about. The opinions of a town that had already decided who Emily was and who these children couldn't be. Yet, their whispers had seeped into his skin. And so, with a heavy, reluctant heart, he agreed. He told himself it wasn't about Emily. It was about protecting Jacob and Joshua from a lifetime of rumors and cruelty. He needed the world to see what he already felt, that they were his sons, both of them, beyond any shadow of doubt. The waiting was agony. In those long days, he lived in a haze of grief and confusion, his home too quiet without Emily's laughter. The babies, his boys, became his lifeline. He fed them, rocked them, watched their tiny faces as they slept. And in the curve of Jacob's nose and the shape of Joshua's hands, he began to see Emily. It was there, subtle but undeniable, her spirit, her love, her legacy. When the results arrived, he opened them alone, his hands trembling, his breath shallow. The words were clear and irrefutable. Both children shared his DNA. They were his biological sons. The relief should have been all-consuming, but it was tainted by the bitter taste of guilt. He had doubted her. He had let the world's poison seep into his heart and stain his love for her. And worse, he realized that the town, the people who had turned against him, would not care about the truth. The facts would never silence their prejudice. The whispers would find new shapes. The stares would continue. His sons, innocent and perfect, would face a lifetime of questions and cruelty for simply existing. He felt the weight of Emily's last words in every corner of his shattered heart. Take care of them. The promise was no longer a plea, it was a commandment, a vow. He would protect them from the world's cruelty, from the eyes that could not see beyond skin, beyond color. And if the town refused to make room for his family, then he would find a place that did. As the sky outside turned from gray to black, Michael sat in the dim nursery, the twins cradled against his chest. Their tiny breaths were soft and steady, their warmth the only light in his darkness. The storm that had taken Emily from him still raged through his soul, but he felt for the first time a flicker of resolve. He would not let this world define his family. The road ahead would be brutal. He could feel it, heavy as a shadow. But he would walk it, not for himself, for them. And he would never let them walk it alone. The results should have been the end of the whispers. The DNA test was conclusive. Jacob and Joshua were both Michael's biological sons. Yet, in the small insular world of their town, truth mattered less than belief. The whispers didn't stop. They simply changed shape, shifting from accusations of infidelity to disbelief at nature itself. "It's impossible," said the waitress at the local diner, wiping down the counter as a cluster of customers nodded in agreement. "Doctors make mistakes all the time. Or maybe the lab mixed up the results." Across the street at the hardware store, an old man shook his head slowly. "That ain't right," he muttered, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "I don't care what some paper says. Look at them kids. You don't need a test to see what's plain as day." Online, the gossip was crueler. Michael became a topic in the local Facebook groups where ignorance and bigotry festered in every comment. People shared photos of the twins from the hospital's announcement board, debating their features like they were solving a puzzle. "I've heard of recessive genes, but come on," wrote one user. "There's no way they have the same father." A reply quickly followed. "Maybe she cheated and he's too stupid to care." Others spun wilder theories, switched babies, donor mix-ups, even conspiracies involving the hospital. The idea that the twins could simply be brothers, born from the same parents, seemed too outrageous for the town to accept. Michael tried to shield himself from it all, but the whispers found him wherever he went. When he entered the grocery store, conversations would fall to hushed murmurs. People no longer met his eyes. At the gas station, two teenagers laughed openly as they saw the twins in their car seats. "Hey, dude," one of them jeered, "so which kid's the milkman's?" The laughter echoed as they drove off, leaving Michael gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. But the deepest cut came from his own family. George, his father, was unchanged. "Paper or no paper," he said one night, his voice flat and cold, "I still don't believe it. Science doesn't change what a man can see with his own eyes. Maybe there was a mix-up at the hospital. You should push for another test, a real one." Michael's fists clenched at his sides. "They are real tests, Dad. It's science, not your gut feeling." George's eyes narrowed. "Then explain it to me, Michael. Explain how that boy," he pointed sharply, meaning Joshua, "came from you." "They both did." Michael's voice cracked, his grief and rage finally boiling over. "Emily loved me. She never betrayed me." His father's mouth pressed into a thin line. "I didn't say she cheated," he muttered, though the implication was always there, unspoken but loud. "I'm saying things don't add up, and people are talking. They're laughing at you." Michael's voice dropped, low and cold. "I don't care what they say. And if you do, then you care more about your pride than your own grandson's." George's silence was answer enough. Christina, his sister, tried to soften the blow, but only drove the knife deeper. "Look," she said one afternoon, her voice gentle but hesitant, I believe the results. I really do, but, Mike, people will never stop talking. You're going to have to deal with that for the rest of your life. Are you ready for that?" He looked at her and something in his chest broke. "I lost Emily," he said, his voice raw. "Now you're asking me to give up on my sons?" Christina's face fell. "No," she whispered. "I'm asking if you're ready to fight, because you'll be fighting every day and so will they." And she was right. The fighting began immediately. At his repair shop, business dried up overnight. Longtime customers suddenly found somewhere else to go. The few who stayed would eye him with thinly veiled curiosity, their questions probing, their sympathy false. "Hey, Mike," one man asked, leaning on the counter with a smirk. "You ever gonna tell us the real story about those kids?" Michael's voice was steel. "The real story is they're my sons. That's all you need to know." The man chuckled. "Sure, if you say so." The break-ins started shortly after. Twice, someone shattered the windows of his shop, leaving nothing stolen, just glass and chaos. The second time, a message was spray-painted on the wall in crude, dripping letters. "Liar." The police came, took a report, and left without promises. "Probably just kids messing around," the officer said, his tone dismissive. Michael recognized the same thin veneer of doubt in his eyes. But the worst was still to come. One evening, Michael took the twins for a walk through the park. The sun dipped low, casting a warm glow over the trees. Jacob toddled ahead, chasing a drifting leaf, while Joshua gripped his father's hand tightly, his wide eyes taking in the world. A group of men, familiar faces from town, sat on a bench with beer cans in hand. As Michael passed, their conversation grew loud, meant for him to hear. "Look at that. Poor guy, raising someone else's kid and doesn't even know it." Another voice, gruffer, called out directly, "Hey, Mike, which one of them is yours? Or did you get a 2-for-1 special?" Laughter exploded from the group. Michael stopped. The air felt thick and his chest burned with fury. He turned, his voice cutting through their laughter like a blade. "They're both mine," he said, his voice hard and clear. "You got something else to say?" One of the men, a large, broad-shouldered figure Michael recognized as a former classmate, stood up slowly. "Hey, we're just kidding, man. Don't get your panties in a twist. Besides," his eyes flicked to Joshua, "that one doesn't look like he belongs." The world narrowed to a single point. Before Michael could think, his fists found the man's face. Bone cracked under his knuckles, and the man hit the ground with a grunt. The others surged forward, and for a few chaotic seconds, Michael was in the middle of fists and curses and fury. When the police arrived, it was Michael they arrested. The men called it self-defense, painting themselves as the victims. Michael, bloodied and bruised, spent the night in a cell. The next morning, Christina bailed him out. She said nothing as they drove home, but the tension was heavy between them. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're scaring me," she said softly. "This isn't you." He stared out the window, his jaw tight. "I'm protecting them." "But at what cost?" she asked. "You can't fight the whole town, Mike, and even if you win, they'll never stop. Not here." Michael didn't answer, but the weight of her words pressed down on him all the way home. He walked into the nursery, his ribs aching, his face bruised, and saw his sons sleeping. Jacob, peaceful and unbothered. Joshua, curled tight, his tiny brow furrowed even in sleep, as if the world's cruelty had already reached him. And then Michael knew. Christina was right. He couldn't win. Not here. The town had made its choice. Their truth didn't matter, but his sons did. The next morning, he listed the shop for sale. Within a month, the house too. The whispers grew louder as the news spread. Some called him a coward. Others said he was running from the truth. But Michael didn't care. He wasn't running from anything. He was running toward something. A place where his sons could live without their existence being a question, where their family wouldn't be a riddle to solve, where they could simply be his. And he would find it, no matter how far he had to go. The city felt different from the moment Michael arrived, a sprawling, bustling world that pulsed with life. Tall buildings reached skyward, and the streets buzzed with a constant rhythm of footsteps, horns, and voices. It was a far cry from the narrow sidewalks and familiar faces of his hometown. Here, he was invisible, one face in a crowd, and for the first time in what felt like forever, that anonymity brought relief. He had rented a modest apartment on the third floor of an aging brick building. It wasn't much, a cramped two-bedroom with creaky floors and windows that whistled when the wind blew, but it was theirs. The nursery was smaller now, the walls bare and unpainted, but the twins didn't seem to mind. Jacob and Joshua, just toddlers, explored their new home with wide-eyed wonder, their tiny feet padding across the worn wooden floors. Michael watched them, his chest tight with both hope and fear. This was their fresh start, their chance to live without the weight of judgment. Michael found work quickly, his skills as a mechanic in high demand at a small auto repair shop on the city's east side. The owner, Luis, was a kind man who asked no questions beyond, "Can you fix a transmission?" Michael liked that. Work became his refuge, a place where he could lose himself in the familiar rhythm of engines and tools, where oil and grease covered his skin but never left stains on his heart. At first, life felt almost normal. He would wake early, prepare breakfast for the twins, and drop them off at a local daycare before heading to the garage. In the evenings, they would share simple meals, macaroni and cheese, chicken nuggets, the staples of childhood. Jacob always talked the most, his words spilling out in excited bursts while Joshua listened quietly, his eyes always searching, always questioning the world. They played together endlessly, Jacob leading imaginary adventures, Joshua following with his quiet but steady presence. And every night Michael would tuck them in with the same promise he made to Emily. "I'll keep you safe." But the world, he quickly learned, did not surrender its cruelty so easily. The first cracks appeared at the daycare. At pickup time, Michael began noticing the lingering glances from other parents, the curious, puzzled looks when he arrived to take both boys home. At first, he ignored them, focusing on Jacob's cheerful chatter and Joshua's shy smiles. But soon, the questions began, masked in politeness, but edged with disbelief. "So, they're both yours?" a mother asked one afternoon, her tone laced with thinly veiled skepticism. Michael's jaw tightened. "Yes, they're twins." Her eyebrows lifted. "Oh, how unusual." Unusual. That word clung to him like a stain, harmless on the surface but poisoned underneath. Then came the first incident. One day, when he arrived early, he found Jacob alone in a corner of the playroom, his face red and tear-streaked. Joshua stood in front of him, small fists clenched, his eyes blazing with a fury Michael had never seen. "What happened?" Michael demanded, his heart pounding. The daycare worker, a young woman with flushed cheeks, hurried over. "It was a misunderstanding," she stammered. "Another child said something unkind, but it's been handled." Michael knelt beside his sons. "Jacob? Josh? What did they say?" Jacob sniffled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "They said, Josh isn't my brother, that he's not part of our family." Joshua's small voice, cold with anger, followed. "I told them they were wrong." Michael felt something inside him crack and burn. His sons, barely old enough to read, were already carrying the weight of the world's ignorance. His hands shook as he pulled them both into a fierce embrace. "They're wrong," he whispered, his voice thick with sorrow and rage. "You are brothers. Always." He spoke to the daycare director the next morning, demanding an apology and assurances that such cruelty wouldn't be tolerated. The director nodded solemnly, promising inclusivity workshops and policies on anti-bullying. But Michael saw the familiar flicker in her eyes. Discomfort, confusion, the unspoken how, that always followed them. The questions followed them to the park, to the grocery store, even to the doctor's office. "Are they adopted?" strangers would ask casually, as though his family was a puzzle they were entitled to solve. Some asked if he was married to a black woman. Others offered biology lessons on genetics he never asked for, their tone laced with doubt. The worst moments were the ones that landed unseen. The store clerk who handed him one receipt but addressed him and Joshua separately. The family at the park who invited Jacob to play but left Joshua standing alone. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And Michael felt every one of them, but his sons felt them too. Joshua, once so quietly curious, began to withdraw. He clung closer to Michael in public and grew more hesitant around strangers. His once wide-eyed wonder dimmed, replaced by a wariness far too old for his years. One night, as Michael tucked them into bed, Joshua's soft voice pierced the dark. "Dad?" Michael paused, his heart already bracing. "Yeah, buddy?" "Why?" His voice was so small. "Why don't people think I'm Jacob's brother?" Michael's throat closed. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping beneath his weight. "Because people don't always understand things that are different," he said carefully. "But just because they don't understand doesn't mean it's not true. You and Jacob are brothers. Nothing changes that. Not what people say, not what they think." Joshua was quiet for a long moment. "But why do they say I don't belong?" Michael's chest ached. "Because some people think families have to look a certain way. But they're wrong. Families are about love, not about looking the same." The boy's small fingers twisted in the blanket. "Do you wish I looked like Jacob?" The question shattered him. Michael gathered Joshua into his arms, holding him close. "No," he whispered fiercely. "You are exactly who you're meant to be. And I wouldn't change a thing about you, not ever." But the world, Michael knew, would not be so kind. The years passed, and soon the boys were ready for school. Michael chose carefully, enrolling them in a diverse public elementary where he hoped their differences would be met with acceptance rather than suspicion. But hope, he found, was a fragile shield. The first weeks were smooth. Jacob thrived, quickly making friends, his energy and charm winning over classmates and teachers alike. Joshua, quieter but no less sharp, observed more than he spoke. He enjoyed reading and drawing, and his teachers praised his patience and thoughtfulness. But soon the cracks appeared again. At parent-teacher night, Michael found himself explaining, again and again, that yes, they were twins, and no, there was no mistake. At recess, some children questioned why Joshua called Jacob his brother. "You can't be twins," they said, with the blunt cruelty only children possess. "You don't even look alike." And Joshua, who once answered with his fists, began instead to fall silent. Michael met with the principal, Mrs. Howard, a woman with tired eyes but a warm voice. She listened carefully as he explained what his boys were facing. "I understand," she said, her tone genuinely empathetic. "But children, they're curious. They don't mean harm." "They're learning from someone," Michael replied, his voice hard. "This is about more than curiosity. It's about what they're being taught to see, and not see in the world around them." Mrs. Howard nodded slowly. "You're right, and we can do better." True to her word, she introduced diversity programs and classroom discussions on family, race, and identity. Teachers read books that showed families of all shapes and colors. The school library displayed stories of siblings who didn't look alike, but loved each other just the same. Yet change came slowly. One afternoon, Michael received a call from the school. There had been another incident. He arrived to find Joshua sitting in the nurse's office, his cheeks scraped, his eyes dull. "What happened?" Michael demanded. Mrs. Howard spoke softly. "Another boy. He told Joshua he couldn't be Jacob's brother. Joshua told him to stop. The boy pushed him." Michael's blood boiled. "Where's the other kid?" "His parents are being called," she said, "but Joshua didn't hit back. He just walked away." Michael's anger faltered. "He didn't fight?" Joshua's voice, quiet but firm, cut in. "You told me, Dad," he said, his eyes brimming. "You told me to show them they were wrong, not with fists, but by being their brother, no matter what." And Michael, broken, proud, and aching, knelt before his son and pulled him close. "You're right," he whispered, "and I am so proud of you." But as he held his boy, Michael knew. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The years moved swiftly, carving their stories into time. The boys grew, and with them the world seemed to grow sharper, more complex, and more demanding. Michael had hoped that the battles they fought in childhood would ease with age, that understanding would bloom where ignorance had taken root. But life, he learned, rarely softened its edges. Jacob and Joshua entered high school as young men shaped by the world's questions and their father's unwavering love. They stood side by side, but their paths were marked by different struggles. Jacob, with his easy charm and light skin, moved through the world with less resistance. He was popular, quick to laugh, and quicker to lead. His teachers praised his confidence. His peers followed his example. Joshua, quieter but no less determined, fought battles that Jacob never saw. Teachers confused him for other black students, calling him the wrong name. Security guards at the mall followed him when he walked alone, but ignored him when Jacob was by his side. Group projects found him excluded until his sharp mind proved him indispensable. He bore these slights with a stoic resilience, but they left cracks beneath his skin, fissures that Michael saw and felt deeply. Their differences, once a source of joy, became a wedge between them. "Must be easy," Joshua muttered one day, his voice cold, "being the good twin, the one they listen to, the one they like." Jacob's eyes flashed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Joshua bit back, "that you don't have to explain yourself every damn day. You don't have to prove you belong everywhere you go." Jacob's face hardened. "You think it's easy for me? Living with people who think I'm lying every time I say you're my brother?" "At least they believe you," Joshua snapped. "They don't believe me. They never do." The silence that followed was heavy and cruel. Michael heard it from the doorway, the sharp crack of something breaking that no father could fix with his hands. That night, he sat them both down. His voice, worn but steady, carried the weight of his own battles. "I know," he said, his eyes moving between them. "I know how the world sees you, and I know it's not fair. Jacob, you see doors open for you that slam in Joshua's face. And Joshua, you carry a weight Jacob can't feel. But hear me. You are brothers. That's more than blood. That's choice. That's bond. And you're strongest together. The tension lingered, but in the days that followed, it began to ease. Not because their struggles vanished, but because they began to carry them side by side. The school years brought new challenges, but also new purpose. When a teacher in their history class dismissed a discussion on racial justice with a sigh and a flippant, "That's in the past," it was Joshua who stood and said, "No, it's not." And when the school's student council planned a heritage event without a single acknowledgement of black culture, it was Jacob who rallied their peers to demand change. Together, they organized a forum, a space for students to share their experiences. They told their own story about being brothers in a world that refused to believe them. Their courage sparked something, a ripple that turned to a wave. Students began sharing their own battles with prejudice, ignorance, and identity, and in that wave, the twins found their calling. "We're going to law school," Joshua told their father one night, his voice firm with conviction. "We're going to fight this, not with fists, with the law." Jacob nodded, his voice steady. "We'll make sure voices like ours are heard." Michael's heart, so often bruised by the world, swelled with something fierce and bright. "Then fight," he said, his voice thick with pride, "and never stop." Law school tested them, but it did not break them. They saw injustice, not in abstract theories, but in real lives. Families torn to wrongful evictions, workers robbed of fair pay, children denied equal education. Joshua, with his analytical mind, dismantled arguments like an engine laid bare. Jacob, with his charisma, turned cold facts into burning truth. And when they graduated, together, side by side, it was Michael who cheered the loudest, his pride a beacon, his love an anchor. They opened their own practice, a small law office with worn furniture and second-hand desks, but with a purpose as strong as steel. The sign on the door read, "Carter and Carter Attorneys at Law." Their first case was a battle for an immigrant family, wrongfully evicted from their home. The landlord, smug and sure, came to court with expensive lawyers and hollow excuses. But the twins came with something stronger: truth, conviction, and the fire of every battle they had ever fought. Joshua's cross-examinations were sharp and unyielding, each question a scalpel peeling back the landlord's lies. Jacob's closing argument burned with righteous fury, his words a blade that carved through indifference and doubt. They won. The family kept their home, and the world began to watch. More cases followed. Workers, families, victims of discrimination. The people who had been unseen and unheard found champions in the brothers who had spent their lives proving they belonged. Journalists came, seeking their story, and they told it, about Emily, whose love made them brothers, about Michael, whose courage made them strong, about a world that tried to divide them and the bond that no ignorance could break. The headlines called them the brothers-in-law. But Michael knew they were more than that. They were his legacy, and Emily's dream, and something the world could never deny: a family, whole, unbreakable. In time, they returned to the place where their battle had begun, the small town that once spat them out. But they returned not in bitterness, but in truth. They visited the cemetery, laying flowers at Emily's grave. Michael's voice was soft but certain. "You'd be proud," he whispered, "of the men they've become, of the world they're building, of the fight they've won." The twins stood behind him, side by side, different as ever, but bound by something deeper than blood. Joshua, tall and steady, with the fire of justice in his heart. Jacob, bright and fierce, with the power to change minds. Together, a force the world could not break. The town, older now, paused to watch them. Some still whispered, but others, many others, nodded with quiet respect. And in those faces, Michael saw the world changing. Slowly, imperfectly, but changing. As they walked away from the grave, Jacob spoke softly, his voice carrying both grief and gratitude. "She'd be proud of you, Dad." Joshua's voice followed, steady and true. "And so are we." Michael, his heart full, his battle fought, and his promise kept, smiled through tears he no longer needed to hide. "Let's go home," he said, and they did, together. Always. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful and thought-provoking tales. Share this video with your friends and family to spread the message. And if you're ready for more, check out our other videos, each with its own unique journey. Thank you for watching.